Thanks, Dave. Brother Chris, don't be afraid. That's advice and the title of your talk, so thanks.
Thanks, Sam. Good afternoon, everyone. Getting better. That's great. So this afternoon, we've come to our third class here on Christ's common words with their uncommon significance. So we looked at things Jesus didn't say on Wednesday evening, all the things that we hear society throwing at us, words that Jesus would have never said. And then last night we looked at follow me. These are simple words and words that we would hear, words that we would say to each other. You know, can I follow you home, or can you show me the way? And what that means in terms of our relationship to Jesus. So there is a handout, as there has been for every class. If you don't have one, Brother Ralph will be able to get you a copy. So put up your hand. There's enough for everybody. Again, just so you can follow through. And the key thing is the bottom third of the handout. I want you to have some takeaways from this class that are impactful and meaningful for you. So don't be afraid. These are words that every parent has said to their child at some point or other. Friends say to each other. These are common words. Don't be afraid. Hopefully we'll see coming from the mouth of our Lord even more impactful and should motivate us to not be afraid even more. So there are many phobias in the world, and we've got some of them up there, from the natural environment, from animals, from situations, from medical treatment, lots of phobias. So the phobia is the Greek word for fear, and we understand that. Maybe we differentiate, a phobia is maybe a little more serious, but it is a fear. Sometimes an irrational fear, sometimes a very natural fear. There are certain things, like people that are afraid of heights, for example, or afraid of confined spaces. I mean, it's not their fault. It's just that comes naturally. So we're going to see that today, that fear is natural, and we have to find a way to overcome it. So, nomophobia. Anyone knows what that one is? Nomophobia. These are real, by the way. I'm not making these up. You might think these are kind of funny, but they're real. Anybody? Fear of being told no. It's the fear of not having mobile phone access. That must be a 21st century one. Nomophobia. This one, phobophobia. Fear of having a fear. Yeah, fear. It's like, I am not really afraid of anything, but I must be afraid of something, and you're afraid of having a fear. Yeah. This one, decidophobia. Did you know that, or just parsed that out? Yeah, good. Fear of making decisions. Maybe we all get kind of immobilized by this one, just kind of like, you just can't do it. It's just, yeah, okay. I've got a couple more here that I'm not going to make you guess. This is a real one, and I'm not going to try and say that. Anyone want to give it a go? Yeah. I mean, I knew it ahead of time, and I still wasn't going to try and say it publicly. Or this one. Fear of long words. Yeah. I've often wondered why abbreviation is such a long word, but anyway. Yeah, that one there, fear of long words. So we're going to take a minute. This is new. We didn't do this in the last classes. This is a brainstorm. So what are you afraid of? Start shouting them out. Brainstorming here. What are we afraid of? Sorry? Train timetables. There's probably a word for that one too. Storms. And our brothers and sisters in Florida right now are in a bad way because of a storm. Yeah, there's 10 ecclesias in Florida that got hit by that Hurricane Milton or whatever. So yeah, keep going. Fear of dying. Yeah, absolutely. We got an answer for that one. I can't help maybe some of the other ones, but yeah, the scriptures have a lot to say about that. Well done. Lightning. Oh, we love a lightning storm. I mean, as long as you're safe, but spiders is real. We were talking to someone just recently. Oh, gnomes. Noam's picture. That's her thing. That's right. Yeah. Oh, time has expired. Sorry. Now this is a quote that's there. That's I think also on your sheet there. This is amazing, right? Elisha and his servant Gehazi, and they're surrounded by the Assyrian army, right? And they're in this city, but I mean there was like 180,000 plus soldiers out there. And Elisha says, "Don't be afraid. You know, they that are with us are more than they that be with them." And Gehazi is probably thinking, huh? All I see are Assyrian soldiers as far as the eye can see. And of course, Elisha says, open his eyes to the Lord, and he sees the multitudinous angels there just, waiting to act. And the amazing thing is it only took one, right? It's not as though you needed more angels than the soldiers, but they were all there for the reassurance of God's people. And we need to see that. So you can't really necessarily be seeing with the natural eye. Like you looked out over that parapet of the city, all you would see is Assyrian soldiers, right? But the eye of faith sees beyond that, right? So we have lots to encourage us to not be afraid. Okay, survey says, as of this morning, and I didn't get a chance to check, we have still 42 responses. So here the first question was, what makes you anxious? And this was a check all that apply. So the numbers don't add to 100. So uncertainty about the future, earning enough money, my relationships. That was interesting. Anxious about just working through that, the different relationships we have, which is interesting. I find that that's something we can all share in common. So if you're anxious about, the relationships that you have, every other person said yes to that one there. Feeling guilty about my sins, we will talk about that Sunday morning, God willing. Jesus has an answer for that as well. Finding a partner and getting good grades. So this was initially a survey I made up for the young people's program I did 3 weeks ago. So this group is probably more mature than that in terms of age. So maybe good grades don't matter so much to the parents, for themselves anyway. But maybe said anxious about your child finding a partner, or anxious about your child getting good grades, maybe those numbers would have been higher. Physical appearance, other, and actually I forgot to check, maybe you wrote some things. I'll double back on that. That's a different part of the survey, right? You had a chance to write things. How often do you feel afraid? I thought this was interesting. And almost never. That's encouraging, right in the middle there, 55%. But regularly, it's a high percentage too. So I think this is worth talking about. This is something that does resonate with us. We do have fears and anxieties, phobias that we need to talk about. Okay, so if you are in that situation, and it might be a fairly regular thing for a high percentage of you, or even just once in a while. So, and I think one of the main takeaways I want to get across today is that feeling afraid is not a sin. All right, it's a natural reaction, like finding out that someone's afraid of spiders. You can't reason that through. It is, in a sense, irrational maybe for you, but it's real for them. Okay? So that's not a problem. So here, I just went through, and this is not necessarily an exhaustive list, but I tried to search for where the word fear was in Scripture and the context. So you're in good company if you feel afraid. That's a list of people in the Bible who were told by an angel or by God to not be afraid. Well, if Jesus is saying to someone, don't be afraid, obviously the person is afraid. So, Abraham, Hagar, Rachel, Jacob, Joseph's brethren, children of Israel in the wilderness, Moses, Joshua, and so on. So, hopefully this encourages us, number one, to not be discouraged when we're afraid, but also know that those were faithful people who overcame, with God's help, their fears, their phobias. So, all right, so you're in good company. You may or may not have heard of this person. I'd heard this statistic, and I had to do a little bit of research. So we've got this individual named Richard Wurmbrand, And in 1948, he was a Christian living in Romania with his wife and 10-year-old son at the time that the Russians invaded. This was really interesting to me. So he lived through the Nazi occupation, okay, and they were liberated by the Russians in Romania. And it actually got worse for Christians and for some. What he suffered under the hands of the communists was in some ways worse. So he had just lived through the Nazi experience, and then the Russians came along. And he, as a Christian, had discovered that there's 366 verses in the Bible that tell us not to be afraid. In fact, some would say it's a command. It's not really a suggestion. We need to consciously tell ourselves to not be afraid, because fear comes naturally, and we need to overcome it. Now, it's interesting that he had found 366. Now, I did this, and I typed in don't be afraid or fear not. And with a simple Bible search, I came up with just under 200. So he's extended this out a little bit to, maybe some different words were used, but the gist of the passage was, don't be afraid. And he had done this consciously during the Nazi occupation for his own benefit. And he listed them out. And he had enough for every day of the year, plus a leap year, and he memorized each verse. It was so important, and I guess maybe living in that kind of a situation would maybe make it a bit more real. We probably have it a bit too easy, but he was living under Nazi occupation. So he had done this. He was kidnapped and arrested on February the 29th, 1948, by the communists. And as they put a sack over his head and shoved him into a car and sped away, Richard asked them what the date was. They told him, and he, having memorized a do not fear verse for each day of the year, was able to call to mind his verse for that day, Psalm 56, verse 3, which we just read, "What time I'm afraid, I will trust in thee." It was February the 29th, and he had a verse for that day. Of course, it was a leap year, and he had a verse for that day. Now, he's written this book, or a book is written about him, called Tortured for Christ, and it was also made into a movie. I did read the book. It's not a really well-written book, and I have not watched the movie, but interesting. So a little bit of encouragement for us, that literally every day of the year you could have a verse that encourages to don't be afraid of what you're experiencing unique to that day. And it proved true for him on February the 29th, 1948. I said that. So it's called Tortured for Christ. If you're interested in chasing that down, it's certainly fits into what we're talking about today. So let's look up some of these. Again, most of the verses will be here. You might want to do some coloring in. You might want to highlight some key things. But here we've got the situation of Jairus, the ruler of the synagogue. And the encouragement here is we're going to face scary or stressful or uncertain situations. And in those situations, our natural reaction will be to be afraid, to worry, to be anxious. This is natural. So think about Jairus. He's had the courage to go and ask Jesus for help. He's a ruler of the synagogue, and they don't come across so well in the New Testament, right? Rulers of the synagogue are very, like the one guy who said, look, there's 6 days you can come and get healed. Don't come on the Sabbath, okay? If you need to get healed, come another, how cold and callous. All right? But this guy went out of his way to go and find Jesus and ask him to come and heal his daughter who was sick. And of course, while they're getting from where they were, and he said, Jesus, please come, and I'll bring you to my house. Between that point until they get to the house, what happened? What happened? During that journey from Jesus saying, yes, I'll come and heal your daughter, to getting to his house, what happened? His daughter died. Why did his daughter die? Why did it take so long to get there? Woman with the issue of blood. Can you imagine Jairus, tapping his foot, looking at, well, he didn't look at his watch, but you know what I mean? Looking at his sundial, whatever, and come on. And there's a crowd, because remember when Jesus said, who touched me? They said, you're being thronged. So he's making his way through this crowd. Jesus takes the time to stop and say, no, someone touched me. And we don't know how long that took, that whole thing to transpire, but it took time, and the clock's ticking for Jairus' daughter. And then a message comes and says, you might as well not trouble the master, she's dead. Like, ooh, how would you feel in that situation? Okay, so that's what Jairus is experiencing in this situation. Okay, so while Jesus was speaking to the woman, someone says, your daughter's dead, don't trouble the master. The first thing Jesus said, fear not, just believe. I told you I would come. I gave you my word. You said, come and heal my daughter. I said, yes, let's go. Just trust me. That's pretty powerful. Because in whatever situation we're in, we need to believe that Jesus knows best, that his Father knows best, and we need to trust his timing. We might say, if only you'd been there, if only you'd been able to make it, my daughter wouldn't have died. And he says, fear not, believe only, she shall be made whole. So belief is an antidote for fear. That may seem pretty simple, but that's what we're learning there. So when we feel fearful, when we're wondering about the future or wondering about the past or just trying to process what's going on with our life, and we feel that stress and that anxiety and that fear coming on, believe. What sort of things should we believe? Like, that's very specific. Jairus was told by Jesus, I'm coming to heal your daughter. What kind of things could be for us? To believe only. Don't fear, believe only. How can belief in what could be an antidote for our fears? That's not a rhetorical question. Yeah, God's love for us. So when a father loves a child, they're not going to let them experience things that are going to break them, like permanently. There might be some difficulties and trials, but God's love is going to bring us through whatever it is. Okay, God's love, good one. Thanks, Anastasia. Yep. What do you mean? How do you mean resurrection? Yeah? Okay. Okay. So at some point, what happens in this life it's difficult and it's hard, but it's kind of temporary and transient, because the resurrection is then for life. Yeah, eternal. Good one, thanks. Yep, Em? God and Jesus have their own time frame, and it's very different than ours. So taking the long view and just, we get on little sidetracks. I heard, and I wish I could remember who I heard the quote from. Well, I do actually remember. Talk to me later if you're interested. But I heard it said, God is always almost late. God is always almost late. From our perspective. It's like, come on, why wasn't, and it's like, no, he's always right on time, but he's always almost late. It's something to think about. It's interesting perspective. Okay, what about this one? During a storm, Matthew 14. Matthew 14, starting at 22. Straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship and to go before him to the other side. So he's like, sends them off. Now think about this. Jesus is there, and he says, okay, guys, get in the boat. I'll meet you on the other side. Then all of a sudden, they get out in a storm. Now, what's going through your mind? Well, what would be going through my mind? What was Jesus thinking? Why did he put me on this boat? He would have known a storm was coming. What's he done? Right? Well, he's done that for us. He's put us in a boat, and he said, off you go. I'll see you on the other side. And then we're in a storm. Mentally, physically, emotionally, stuff happens. We're in a storm. Now, these were hardened fishermen. They knew that sea. They knew that lake, Galilee. They were experienced fishermen. And when they got to the middle of the sea, they were tossed with the waves. The wind was contrary. And of course, they were afraid for their lives. And the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, it's a spirit, or a ghost, a phantom. And they cried out for fear. Now, just think about that for a minute. Do you think the disciples believed in ghosts? I mean, academically, I don't think so. But when we get into these situations, we can, maybe old habits come in, or we do things that don't make sense because we're acting out of fear. Okay? So they cried out in fear, but straight away Jesus spoke to them and said, "Be of good cheer, it is I, don't be afraid." All right, so that's just an example. So if you are in a storm in your life right now and you're wondering what was God thinking or what was Jesus thinking when he put me in this boat and shoved me off into the existence I have now, what was he thinking? There's this, surely he didn't think about this wave or that wave or, this, experience I'm having. He did. And, things could have been different. They could have got to the other side fine if they'd kind of persevered through it. But in this case, Jesus, in his mercy, went to them. He walked to them on the water. It's just, we know that story so well. But we have to remember that somehow applies to us. We have to see that. So when we were in Kenya just recently, Bella Morgan, yes, was there, a young person, and she said that someone had said this to her, and it stuck with her, and it stuck with Martha and me since. So believe your beliefs and doubt your doubts. That's pretty powerful. Because when we get afraid, when we get stressful, those get reversed. Yes? We doubt our beliefs and we believe our doubts. And perhaps it's as simple as reflecting back on our life's experience to other situations and realizing God got you through it. He's not going to abandon you this time. We've all experienced the love of Christ. And sometimes we just need to nail that down. Remember when we went through that situation, we thought it was the end, there's no way we'd ever overcome it. But here we are. God got us through. He surrounded us with people that were a support network. We saw the love of Christ in some of his brothers and sisters. Whatever it was, just anchor that and say, no, I believe that. I believe in the love of Christ. Believe those things. And the doubts that are creeping in, oh, did he really mean it? Or maybe you're not good enough, or this shows that you're whatever, like all those doubts. Think, I don't know, I'm going to doubt those doubts. There's maybe, now, sometimes there may be a bit of element of truth on self-reflection, but first reaction, believe your beliefs and doubt your doubts. I think that's pretty powerful. And especially when you start thinking, your mind's telling you about things aren't true, like ghosts and phantoms. But those things will come naturally to us because that's the way we're wired naturally. Yes? So again, just continue on this theme of fearing not in scary or stressful situations. The women at the tomb in Matthew 28, they've come there, and their biggest concern was who's going to roll away the stone. They assumed that the body would still be there, even though Jesus had told them that he was going to rise the third day. You got all these things that it wasn't making sense. At least the women are there. The men are nowhere to be seen. But even in that, there was some challenges to them. And so they see the angel at the tomb. And of course, this is quite often these words, "Don't be afraid" or "fear not," is out of the mouth of angels. Fear not, for I know that you seek Jesus, which was crucified. He's not here, for he is risen, as he said. He told you about this. Believe those beliefs. And doubt those doubts that you have about, who's taken the body, and if, tell me where you've taken him, I'll go get him, and all those kind of things, which is just beautiful in the out of the mouth of those women. Like, you're going to go take me, and then you're going to carry him off somewhere. A grown man with 120 pounds of spices mixed in there, you're not carrying that body anywhere, right? But in their love and devotion, that's what they were thinking. He says, no, he's risen. He's risen. Come see where he lay. And they departed quickly from this sepulcher with fear and great joy. There was this mixed emotion now, and that's going to be sometimes our experience at times as well, right? And they ran to bring the disciples' words. And as they went to tell his disciples, they actually meet Jesus. Maybe the Lord knew they out of the mouth of the angels, don't be afraid, he's risen. There was still some anxiety, there was still some doubt there. So Jesus himself came to them. And, of course, they fall at his feet and they worship him. And what does Jesus say? Don't be afraid. What you heard, what the angels told you is absolutely true. Here I am. I'm alive. Go tell my brethren that they can go to that they should go to Galilee, and they'll see me. So, another quote from young Bella she told us while we were in Kenya together. Don't forget in the dark what you learned in the light. So in those dark times of life, on the road to Emmaus, what did they say? The one that we'd hoped to be the Messiah was crucified. What? You hoped he was going to be the Messiah? You believed that? You trusted in him? Don't forget that. You learn that in the good times, in the light. Don't forget it when you're in the dark. Some of us right now in this room, we're in dark places. Challenges in life that are overwhelming us. Don't forget in the dark what you learned in the light. And today we're focusing on not being afraid. Those are words that Jesus says to each one of us. Don't be afraid. Little clip there, let faith, not fear, be your compass. So this is the problem. This is when fear overwhelms us and now we're making decisions based on fear, that's problematic. The fear was a natural reaction to the circumstances we find ourselves in, loss of a loved one, health problems. Of course, there's going to be some anxiety and some fear for the future. How am I going to, provide for my family because I now have this, injury or this whatever it is that's taking me out of work or whatever those things are. That's a natural reaction. That's not a sin. That's just a natural reaction of our flesh. But if that becomes our compass, that can be problematic. So what we need to do in those times especially is refocus on the things that we learned in the light, the things that we believe. Let those be our compass, not our fear. So let's have a look at the reading we had. Now, and also now we're remembering the backstory to that a little bit, that Richard Wurmbrand had this particular verse memorized for February the 29th. And this verse, this psalm is quoted in a few places, but we're not going to do a detailed analysis of Psalm 56. We're just going to look at it in the context of David and how he had to encourage himself and what we can take away from that for us. So and thanks. Brother David read this for commenting on the title. If you haven't heard Brother Lane Rittmeyer's study on the Psalms, that's just on Good Christadelphian Talks, do so. We heard one, and I haven't heard the other ones yet, but the one that's actually on the podcast is all about the titles in the Psalms, which he says are actually part of the inspired script. They should be verse 1, and in many translations they are, like for example the German translation. But at the beginning here it says in the King James, to the chief musician upon Jonathalam, so on. I'm not going to try and pronounce that. And the one takeaway for today, if you just as a kind of whet your appetite, chief musician is an interpretation of some Hebrew words, and they actually mean the overcomer. It's not a person. It's not the chief musician. It's the literal Hebrew translation should be to the overcomer. This psalm is written to you and to me as overcomers through Christ. And it just I don't know, raises all these psalms to a completely different level. Anyway, that's an aside. So be merciful unto me, O God, for what man would swallow me up. He fighting daily oppresses me, and so on. He's being besieged. David's feeling besieged by all these enemies. They lie. They do all kinds of things to bring me down. They're trying to bring me down. These could be literal enemies. Like here he's when the Philistines took him in Gath. You know that situation. He's trying to flee from Saul. So he's fleeing for his life from the king. He thinks, well, I might as well go over to the Philistines. Now he realizes, oh, that wasn't a good idea. What was I thinking? Because he's letting fear be his compass, and so he pretends to be a madman and so on. This is the context. They took him in Gath. What time am I afraid? I will trust in thee. That was the verse that Richard remembered. But it's not just in that verse. In God I will praise his word. In God I put my trust. I will not fear what flesh can do unto me. Or the way it was read, I will not fear. And then it's a rhetorical question. What can people do to me? Really? In the big scheme of things. And echoes to the words of Jesus. What did Jesus say? Don't fear those that can kill the body, but can't destroy your soul, your essence, your who you are, that resurrection piece, right? But the one you should fear, and this would be in a good sense, God, because he has control of the life that now is and the life to come. And I think it's taken right from here. Don't be afraid. What can man do? What can flesh do? And you might say, well, they can do lots of bad things, like kill you. So? I mean, it's weird to think that, but I mean, that's the worst they can do is take your life. God's got that under control. He can give you eternal life. So I won't be afraid of what man can do to me. And it's a couple of times there in that psalm. God knows our wanderings. He knows our challenges in verse 8. And every tear we cry, it's recorded by God. He keeps those in his book, in his scroll, in his jar, whatever the analogy is in the other psalm there. Thinking back to the Assyrians, when the Assyrians surrounded at the time of Hezekiah, surrounded Jerusalem. You remember what God said to him? I've heard your prayers, I've seen your tears. Right? God knows these things. And the moment we don't think that, and the moment we're like, God's forsaken us or whatever, we can't. We need to be assured of what's being said there. Oh, got it up here. So choose faith, not fear. I'm going to trust in you. What can man do to me? Here we are. We're catching up now. You put all my tears in your bottle. They're in your book. And then verse 11 right at the end. In God I will put my trust. I will not be afraid. What can man do unto me? And we've made commitments. We've made vows to God, and he will deliver us. Ultimately from death, if that's what it takes. That's sort of the worst case scenario. So if it's anything up until that point, challenges of life, difficulties, God is going to deliver us out of those and ultimately keep our feet from falling if we trust in him. Right? It's only when we go off and try and solve the problem ourselves or let fear be our compass that we're going to get in difficulty and probably make matters worse. We trust in God, we believe our beliefs, we doubt our doubts, and we push forward. And we're going to walk before God in the light of the living. Don't forget in the dark what you learned in the light. Okay, just a couple of other sort of scenarios here. Those are all sort of scary situations. This one's maybe a little bit different. So looking at Peter, and you'll probably remember this situation. When Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees saying, "Depart from me." What's the it that Peter just experienced? Do you remember that scenario? Do you remember what happened in this? What had just transpired? Right, the large catch of fish. And do you remember how that went down? What had Peter been doing all the night before? Fishing, right? And how much he had caught? Nothing. Then Jesus comes along, "Can I use your boat to preach to people?" "Oh, sure, whatever." And they're mending the nets and so on, whatever. And then Jesus, at the end of the thing, says, "You know what, Peter? Let's launch out of the deep and catch some fish." And Peter's like, "Huh? The time is wrong because we fish at night. We just been fishing all night and caught nothing." Like, I don't know. I have a good imagination. I try and use it to imagine what's going on when I read the scriptures. In my little version of it, Peter's like, "You know what, Jesus, you're a great preacher. Why don't you stick to preaching? I'll stick to fishing." Right? But what does he say? "Nevertheless, at thy word, I'll launch out." Like, this is going to be another fruitless exercise. It's going to be, they've got to get all the nets out, and right? That's kind of the way I envision it. And what happens? They let out the nets, and what happens? So many fish that when they try and get them into the boat starts to sink, and they have to call their friends. Like, there's an overabundance of fish. And when Peter saw it, He's like, I'm done, right? This is too much for me. Depart from me. I'm a sinful man, O Lord. For he was astonished, and all that were with him, at the draught of fishes that they had taken. Now, maybe Peter's having some irrational self-reflection at this point. Peter's that kind of guy, so emotional, right? Like we all love the Apostle Peter for his just being real, right? But look what Jesus says. Don't be afraid, Peter. From henceforth you'll catch men. I didn't come here by mistake. It wasn't like you were the closest boat and I just randomly picked you to teach out of. No, Peter, I've come here to get you. Don't be afraid. I didn't make a mistake. It's not like I'm not thinking, oh, what did I call Peter for? Like he's useless. No, I've got a plan for you, Peter, and you're going to start catching men. You're going to use the skill and the expertise that you've been developing, and you're going to use it to catch men. You're going to be fishers of men. And that was enough. They forsook all and followed him. Nice segue from last night, right? They followed him. That was it. That's what it took. Jesus was orchestrating all that. He wanted Peter to feel this, have this experience and feel this. Because in a sense it was true. He was a sinful man. And we're all sinful men. What did Paul say later? Of the sinners, I'm the chiefest. I'm like chief sinner. Paul put up his hand. But that didn't hinder his service. So don't be afraid in those times when you feel inadequate or you feel like you just can't do this. It's okay. Jesus hasn't made a mistake in calling you. He's going to make you a fisher of men or a whatever, fill in the blank. He's got a plan for you. He's got a purpose for you. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid when you feel the call. When you feel the urge to serve your master, to render, to give back in some small way. Don't feel inadequate in that. Don't be afraid. So implications, yes, you are weak. You're going to make mistakes. You might as well get that right up front, right? After baptism, like it's not as though everything's going to go smoothly and you're never going to fail. You're going to have experiences like this where we say, depart from me from a sinful man, O Lord. I don't know why you'd bother with me. I'm useless. I always make mistakes. No, that's the wrong attitude. And we need to be reminded, don't be afraid. God doesn't make mistakes. We make mistakes. God doesn't, and he called you. And he will finish the work begun. I love this passage here in Philippians 1, verse 6, where Paul says, speaking on the behalf of the Lord, obviously, for I am confident of this very thing, that he, the Lord, who began a good work in you, will perfect it until the day of Christ Jesus. So we're all a work in progress. God hasn't finished with us yet. We may be overly critical of ourselves at times. There is a place for self-examination. There's a place for honest reflection. But if it gets to the point where we are so distraught that we want to throw in the towel and give it all in, we've gone too far. And that phobia of inadequacy needs to be brought back. And we need to hear the words of Jesus, fear not. I've got a plan for you. I'm going to work through you. We're going to catch people for the Gospels, in the gospel net. We're going to help the ecclesia. We're going to find someone that through your experiences you can build them up. These are experiences that we are going to have, and we're going to feel intimidated by at times, and we can hear the words of Jesus echoing down through time, fear not. So this kind of brought to my mind, and actually it was, I think it was when I did these, one of the young people kind of asked this question, was Jesus ever afraid? So this will be maybe a point of discussion we can think about later. This is you might want to turn this up. It's on the screen here. This is a bit of a peculiar one. They're in the temple, and there's kind of a tap on the shoulder. Someone comes to, I think it's Andrew, and says, we want to talk to your master. And Andrew goes, talks to Jesus, and they were Greeks. They must have been in the court of the Gentiles at this point, but they're in the precincts of the temple. So when Greeks wanted to see him, in John 12:27, Jesus, in response to that, says, now is my soul troubled. And what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour, but for this cause I am come into this hour. It sounds like he's talking about his crucifixion. Certainly, you know, in Gethsemane he had this experience. There was something about the appearance of the Greeks in the temple precincts and desiring to see him that triggered in Jesus' mind how close he was to the end. And this troubled him. know if he was afraid, but there's certainly an anxiety. We know that Jesus was tempted in every point like as we are, yet without sin. So if we feel fear and feel afraid, I don't think it's wrong to think that Jesus had those kind of same experiences. This is the one in Gethsemane. My soul is exceeding sorrowful, even unto death. O Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. I don't know if you really thought about that. He was asking if he could avoid crucifixion. That's how real it was for him and how much of a burden he was. But he said, nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. And this is the one I just quoted. So you might want to link those all up. And I think it's okay for us to say that Jesus understands when you're afraid. When you're facing a daunting task that you're not sure you can get through. Jesus can relate to that and can be there to help us. So this is my conclusion. We can have some discussion about this if you like. Fear is not a sin. It's a natural reaction to physical circumstances. Being immobilized by fear is a sin. Having your compass thrown off so that you head in a different direction away from God, now it's a sin. The fear itself was not. You might be afraid of some daunting thing that's coming up or a circumstance that you're in because of health or because of relationships, or think of all those things we asked what caused fear, whatever box you ticked on the survey. You're feeling fearful about those things, and that's natural. So the question is, what are you going to do next? Once you acknowledge that fear, what can happen in your life to be sure that you're not going to lose sight of the kingdom and staying following Christ, despite the fears and the anxieties and the challenges of life? And this is perhaps, this is the key verse, right? If you ever get into this situation, fear not, little flock, it's your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. That's pretty powerful. That's pretty powerful. It's not like God's like, well, okay, I guess you can get into the kingdom. You ticked enough boxes or something like that, right? Like that's not the attitude of our Father. He's not willing that any should perish. God is overabundant in grace and mercy. That's like, of all his characteristics, like that's right at the top. And he wants us to be in his kingdom. He's not trying to keep us out. He's not trying to what can I do to make sure that we don't get there? I'm a high school math teacher is my career, and I think students sometimes had the opinion that I set tests, and my intention was for them to not pass the test. Lots of trick questions and like the hardest ones, and no, as a teacher, what you want is your students to be successful. Now the test is required. You need to learn some material, but I want you to be successful. I think our God is the same. I think Jesus is the same. He knows we need these experiences, but the experiences are for our benefit. And it's his good pleasure to take us to the kingdom. Now, there's going to be some anxiety. Otherwise, why does it say fear not? So if you have an anxiety about past sin, if you wonder like, am I going to be good enough to be in the kingdom? I just don't think I'm going to be good enough, and that's causing you anxiety and stress and fear, we can remove that, because Jesus is saying, don't be afraid. God wants you in his kingdom. There's nothing that would give him more joy than for you to be in his kingdom. And that can just help us then navigate some of the difficult circumstances. So action plan. We did a little bit, it was okay last evening. So 3 questions here and a statement. Again, if you want to write them out and sort of commit to them, that's fine. If you just want to reflect upon them, that's also fine. So just be straight up. What are you afraid of? What's hindering your walk? What's kind of starting where you start to kind of just freeze up and get paralyzed and you just can't make another step in your spiritual walk? What can I do to trust God's plan more, to let go of my fear? So acknowledge the fear and say, okay, what can I do to to make sure they don't impact me so much as they maybe have in the past. What will I do in the future when fear starts to paralyze me, when you feel yourself kind of starting to freeze up? And what's that one thing you're going to do, starting as soon as possible, that might make a change? So anyone want to share? Sorry? Pride. Oh, okay. Do you want to elaborate on that? Okay. Oh, pray. Okay. Pray. Between my not good hearing and, am I getting that right? What's the take? Help me out here. Pray. Okay. So pray through your fears. That's a great one. Pride is also something I think we need to be afraid of, just as an interesting connection there, right? I don't know, if you're not afraid of that monster inside of you, of which pride is that's the beast, right? Pride. So yeah, both of those I think are good. So that's what I'm afraid of at times, for sure. And how am I going to get through it? I'm going to pray. Thank you. That's just an example. You cannot say anything that's wrong. I don't know why you're afraid to talk, because even if I misunderstand you, we'll make it work. There's no wrong answers. Anyone else want to share? Reach out to others for support and help. That's brilliant. I can assure you, and anyone who's been through a difficult circumstance, if you ask them what got them through it, number one will be friends that reached out and helped me. As an outworking of God, obviously God is the prime mover, but when you see the hand of God in people, that's God manifestation. Yes? So that's an excellent answer. Thanks, Shane. Daily readings. Absolutely, because where else, what other source can you go to? That is the source. Okay. Just that sort of those two things in juxtaposition, how small we are and our failings, and how big God is. Inadequate. So that's the Peter complex. Depart from me, from a sinful man. So how are we going to overcome that? Because we all experience that, for sure. Ralph? Right. Okay. Yep. So yes, it's good to self-reflect and realize how small we are and how great God is. But instead of that being a discouragement, that should be an encouragement, because I can't do this on my own, but God can. There's nothing impossible with God. So despite my weakness, despite my inadequacies, despite my smallness, God is great. He's bigger than my problems. So if my problem is Goliath and I'm David, no problem. I can't beat him on my own, but he's blasphemed God. He's done for, because God is at work. So yeah, so that's good. It's good to be self-reflective and realize our own inadequacies, but then the greatness of God should be an encouragement, not a discouragement, because God is good. He wants us to be in his kingdom, and he can get us through it. Okay, that was well done. Now I've got a prayer here, so I think we'll is that okay? So we're going to close in prayer. You can bow your head and close your eyes. We'll leave the prayer on the screen afterwards for a few moments to reflect upon. I hope this is helpful, and so we'll close in prayer. Heavenly Father, we are so often afraid. It's in our nature. You have given us every reason to be at peace, to be unafraid. You have given us your Son. You have given us a hope and a future. Please help us to trust you, to let go of our fears and phobias, and to fear only you. Your perfect love casts out all our fear, especially the fear of sin and death. We thank you for your love. In your Son's blessed name, amen.
Chris. Afternoon tea is served out, I think, under the porch at the rec hall, and back here in about an hour, about 4 p.m. for our next session. Thank you.